All right, so when we want to start aggregating our data, so we want to change what the spatial aggregation is for whatever reason. And in this particular case, one of the reasons is that the data is so heavy. And the other one is because it was actually only geocoded to the block level. So you can see here that we have a whole bunch of points that are more or less in the center of the block that we're in. And so I can click on any of these and they're just drawing on top of each other. This gets into the data structure of the Chicago PD data. And so in this particular case, they only geocoded it to the block level to make sure that any potentially vulnerable people were not publicly identifiable in this case. This is also the reason why they did not geocode all of the crimes. So when you're trying to aggregate data, you want to make sure that you have some sort of aggregation method. So these are points, but to aggregate, you're going to need polygons. So you're going to need an area that you're going to generalize or add your data to. So in this case, I already pulled out all of the different potential boundaries that might be useful. So you'll see on the left-hand side, I have block groups, blocks, tracts, and counties. So I'm going to pull in the blocks, and I'm doing it the exact same way I did before. I'm dragging and dropping, and I'm going to pull in my block groups, and I'm going to pull in my census tracts. We're going to do this 3 different times so that you can see what it does, and then in the next video I'm going to symbolize them in different ways. So I'm going to just uncheck this reference layer so you can see where things are going. So each one of these is going into one of the different blocks. You have the block groups, which are aggregating that a little bit further, and you have the census tracts, which are further aggregating that. So one of the things with these data sets is that blocks fit into block groups, which fit into census tracts, which fit into counties, which fit into states, which fit into the US. And so they stack really, really nicely on top of each other. Think of them kind of like the combinable Tupperware containers that just all stack inside of each other, or the dolls that you can just keep unpacking and they get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. That's what these are, but for the purpose of the census. So in this case, I'm going to start with the tracts just because this is going to be one of the easier ones. So to summarize what happens in here, I'm going to have to do what's called aggregate points. So to aggregate points, basically what you're saying is you're saying that with this data set, I'm going to take this polygon here, for example, this polygon, and I'm going to count everything that's inside of it. I'm going to count all of the points that are inside of it. So I'm going to count these points, these points, these points, and so on and so on and so on. Now you also notice that there's these ones on the line. So there is an actual location attached to them if you zoom in. So each one of these, while they are in fact on the line, are just on the side of it that's on the right-hand side, which means that they will be counted on this right-hand side polygon. So all of these points will be counted as crimes that happened on the right-hand side polygon. And so that goes for any of these points. And so what it does is it goes through every single one of those polygons, every one of those shapes, and it counts everything that's in there. And so this is what's called aggregate points. It is also known as a spatial join, where you summarize your data. So when you're trying to do these things, pretty much everything you need to do in GIS for a process is available using this geoprocessing toolbox. So if you go to the ribbon on the top and hit view, in the middle you're going to have this nice little toolbox that says geoprocessing pop up. And if I click on it, it's going to pop up on this right-hand side. Now, you may see a variety of tools that are called project favorites, or as you get going with this, you might have some that are called recent. These ones are useful if you do a lot of things fairly commonly. So in my case, recently I've done a lot of calculate fields, pairwise buffers, I've done a lot of those things. The other thing you'll notice is that there's a find tools at the top here, and you also have a search button at the top here. This is really, really useful. Historically, you had to go and search for things. Without searching, you had to know where they lived in this toolbox bar. So you had to know where your function or the thing you wanted to do was located. Now it's pretty simple though. I can just start typing in. If I know what I'm looking for, it usually comes up pretty decently. So in my case, I'm going to start with aggregate and points. Now, you'll notice in this case that there are two different ones, and sometimes this happens. Sometimes there's two or three that are the same, and so you're just going to want to take a look and see which ones are going to be the thing you actually want. So in this case, it says aggregate points, creates polygon features around clusters of proximate point features. That's not exactly what I want. I don't want them to create a polygon around each of these points. I want them to count the points in this larger polygon. And so in this case, that's going to be the second one. So aggregates points into polygon features or bins, which is what this is. So I'm going to click on this, and most GIS functions show up the exact same way. So you're going to have what your input layer is at the top. Usually the second or third one is going to be where you're saving it or what you're naming the output feature. And then you have all of the different things that you want done to that actual feature. So in this case, I'm going to take the Chicago PD crimes, and I'm going to call this, so I'm going to have to think about which one I'm doing. So I'm going to say that these are the Chicago PD crimes, and I'm going to call these the block groups. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to do the block groups. And so then when I go to my polygon layer, the thing I want to aggregate, or the thing I want to actually count the points, I'm going to go to this polygon layer and I'm going to say I want the census block groups. Now, you can do things like summary fields. You can go through any of the different attributes. So again, for attributes, right click, attribute table. These are the different attributes. You can go to any one of these fields and you can do some sort of statistic attached to it if you want. In my particular case, I'm not very interested in that. The only thing I really want is a count of each of those individual crimes. And so what I'm going to do is I'm not going to do anything here, and I'm just going to hit run. So what this then is going to do is exactly what I said before. It's going to count every single point, and it's going to that are in each of the individual blocks, and it's going to count each of those and create a new polygon data set that looks like the census block groups with all of those counts available for you to see. And we're just going to have to wait a little bit for that to happen. In this particular case, the same box that I mentioned before that tells you what your progress is and whether or not it ran or not is going to be down at the bottom. So you can see it's 25, 50, almost finished. And then this green one means that there were no errors. If this goes red, you can hit view details and this same information is going to pop up, but it's going to tell you what the error was. Some errors are fixable, some errors are not. So now you'll notice that I have a new layer over on the left-hand side, and it's called Chicago PD Crimes Block Groups. So this is the new thing that I created. So I can uncheck that, and I can now see that I've got these brown ones. So if I zoom out of these, now I can see that instead of all of the green zones that I had, all of the block groups that I had, now I have a whole bunch of them that are in these various different shades of brown. Now for aggregate points, one of the things to note is that it will, if there is no data somewhere, it will just delete the polygon. So for example, in this block groups over here, right, the initial data set had all of these green ones over here, but there were no crimes in them, so they just got rid of them. There's no data. So it only gives you where there's data. From there you can see that we have a low count of 1 to a high count of 3,104. So I can then go into this, open up this attribute table here, and if I scroll all the way to the right hand side, this is what's going to show me where my count is. So this count here is going to be your number of crimes that happened in each. Now in the attribute table, I can double click them to sort, I can right click on them to sort, or I can tell it a different way to sort. So in my case, I'm just going to sort it descending so I can see what the highest ones are. So my highest one is 3,104, and this one, if I click on this little 1 button over here, it's going to highlight where this one is. And so I can just zoom into this guy, and this is the block group where there's the highest. The one underneath it is probably close by, and then the third highest one is in there. So 1, 2, 3, those are my top 3. So any information that you have is going to be available in that area. And so it just uses all the information from the original data set, so in this case the census block groups, and then it just tacks on whatever you wanted at the end here, which in my case was count. So that's how you aggregate this data. Now I'm going to go back, do the other ones, and then come back in a new video so that you can see how we then start to go through and symbolize data in different ways. I'll be back here in a sec.